Hello and welcome to another Times Radio Frontline recap. Now, I'm Philip Ingram. I currently present Times Radio Frontline, but I'm a former senior British military intelligence officer and global commentator on all matters defence, counter-terrorism, security, cyber, and anything else that people want me to chat about. I've got a number of clips for you this week that I want you to have a look at, but I highly recommend every interview that we've done. We've got Louis, one of the producers, and he presents as well in Kyiv, and some of the interviews that he's got this week are superb, and there have been some other really good ones that we've managed to get done from the studio. But the first thing I want to let you have a look at is President Zelenskyy giving a little statement about the visit of General Keith Kellogg to Kyiv.
Хочу зараз також особливо подякувати генералу Келлогу. Дійсно, раніше ми цього не знали, але виявилось, що у Сполучених Штатів є ППО не гірше, так, ніж Петріоти. Так. Щоразу, коли ви тут, коли ви в Києві, Кіт Келлог, кияни точно можуть трохи виспатись. Хотілося б, щоб ви їздили по всіх містах України. Коли в Києві представник президента Сполучених Штатів Америки, президента Трампа, немає масованих ударів. Вбивці утримуються від вбивств. З представниками інших держав це не працює. І якщо ми разом з партнерами зможемо захищати наш повітряний простір дійсно надійно, і Україну передусім, від ударів, і наших сусідів, як Польща, Румунія, від будь-яких російських загроз в небі, Путін втратить сенс його війни.
Now, in this statement, President Zelenskyy, slightly tongue-in-cheek, turned around and says that it's interesting that there are no massive attacks whenever General Kellogg comes and visits Kyiv, and says he could spend as much time there as he wants. The Russians seem to refrain from murder, is what he says, and this does not usually work when there's representatives from other countries in Kyiv. And Zelenskyy then goes on to call for the US to provide air defence and fighter aircraft to defend Ukraine's skies from Russian attacks, as well as those of its neighbours. And he's referring to the recent Russian drone incursions into Poland. I think President Zelenskyy is trying to up the pressure that he's putting on Donald Trump in as gentle a way and as humorous a way as possible. The next clip that I want you to have a look at is at the state banquet that there was for President Donald Trump in Windsor Castle, and this is from King Charles's speech.
Mr. President, Mrs. Trump, it is with great pleasure that my wife and I welcome you to Windsor Castle on this, your second state visit to the United Kingdom. This unique and important occasion reflects the enduring bond between our two great nations. The ocean may still divide us, but in so many other ways, we are now the closest of kin. Our countries have the closest defence, security and intelligence relationship ever known. In 2 world wars, we fought together to defeat the forces of tyranny. Today, as tyranny once again threatens Europe, we and our allies stand together in support of Ukraine to deter aggression and secure peace. Our countries are working together in support of crucial diplomatic efforts, not least of which, Mr. President, is your own personal commitment to finding solutions to some of the world's most intractable conflicts in order to secure peace. We share the ambition and determination to preserve our majestic lands and waters, above all, to ensure that we have clean water, clean air, and clean food. So in renewing our bond tonight, we do so with unshakable trust in our friendship and in our shared commitment to independence and liberty. Therefore, as we celebrate this unparalleled partnership, allow me to propose a toast to President Trump and the First Lady, and to the health, prosperity, and happiness of the people of the United States of America.
And now this is King Charles in his dinner with Donald Trump, saying our countries have the closest defence, security and intelligence relationship ever known. In two world wars, we fought together to defeat the forces of tyranny. Today, as tyranny once again threatens Europe, we and our allies stand together in support of Ukraine to deter aggression and secure peace. Donald Trump looks slightly uncomfortable at that, but I think that's just the way Donald Trump concentrates. But that was a very powerful message from His Majesty, and something that will not have been lost on Donald Trump, certainly will not have been lost on Vladimir Putin, and I don't think will have been lost on President Zelenskyy, emphasising the UK's real support that there is for Ukraine, and sending a very clear message. Let's hope that turns into some form of action. Now, I've got three interviews I want to point you to this week. The first one is from Louis Sykes when he was in Kyiv, and he sat down with Ambassador Kurt Volker. As Louis was talking to Kurt in this clip, he's talking about Putin not having the military capability to attack another country, let alone a NATO country, and Ukraine continuing to build the country back after the Russian strikes. And of course, Kurt Volker here is talking about the Russian drone incursion into Poland, and suggesting that it's not a deliberate attack. He knows that Russia cannot generate sufficient military capability to attack in, and wouldn't dare try and invoke a NATO Article 5 response. And I have to agree with him in that. Russia doesn't have the ability. But the interesting thing that Kurt says, and if ever there's anyone who gets a real understanding of what's going on, it's Kurt Volker. He's saying that Ukraine is looking to the future and is coming up with its plans for rebuilding and is starting that work now. And that, I think, is significant.
Well, political capital, I mean, he's a dictator, so he doesn't need, and he has an unlimited amount of political capital. He'll do what he wants to do. Military capital, on the other hand, is a different issue. He doesn't have the military capability to launch a new offensive against another country and sustain that, let alone a NATO country that would engender a massive response. So he's probing, he's testing, he's trying to back us off. He's trying to he's trying to threaten a wider war so that we back off. But I don't think he really has the military means to pull that off. And this year's Zapad in Belarus is far smaller than what we saw in 21 before his full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So he is not in the position that he was in a few years ago.
And of course, we've got the very timely Yalta European Security Conference going on at the moment that you've been to. Has there been much discussion there of these recent events?
Absolutely. That's the whole point. Is it brings in some very high-level people from all over Europe, the United States, a few other places. And it is a series of high-level presentations and discussions by ministers, by cabinet members, by generals, so that you really get an up-to-date feel of where things are. And the one observation I would make out of a day and a half of discussions here, as well as another week in other places in Ukraine, Ukraine is already moving. You know, you hear a lot in the West about, well, after the war, then we'll look at Ukraine's reconstruction, development, we can engage more, but we have to end the war first. Ukraine is not waiting. Ukraine is building now, Ukraine is developing now. Lots of things are happening. So one observation I would make after a couple of days here and about a whole week in Ukraine in different places is that Ukraine is not waiting for the end of the war. They are already building, they're already developing. I attended the opening of a electric battery storage site, 200 megawatts for the electricity grid. There's hotels going up. There's a windmill farm that's gone up in the last year. There's all sorts of investment going on now. I was in Odessa and the ports are operating at full speed. You sit at a restaurant overlooking the water and you see all the grain ships going back and forth. So Ukraine is moving and developing. It's not a it's not a helpless case, and it's not something where it's not going to make it. Ukraine is already a sovereign, independent, prosperous European democracy, and that's the only direction that Ukraine will ever go in.
The next video I want to point you towards is one that is rocketing up the chart, so lots of you watched it already. It's me interviewing Sean Bell. Sean, former RAF Harrier pilot and the Air Vice Marshal. And this is Sean and I in the studio talking a lot about air tactics and doctrine. And this is where, in getting into the wider picture, Sean speaks about the loss of Belarus troops due to Putin's aggression in the Baltic states, and how this may lead to the collapse of Belarus if they carry on following the Kremlin leader. And this comes as part of the discussion where effectively we're saying that, if Lukashenko of Belarus used Belarus troops in any operation in direct support of Putin, then those troops are not in Belarus to support Lukashenko. And Lukashenko's position relies on being able to have his military there as a big stick to keep his people under control. We've seen in past years where the people thought that that control had waned slightly, and Lukashenko had to get the troops out on the streets. And that is why we're not seeing Belarus directly supporting Vladimir Putin. But of course, the Zapad 25 exercises are on at the moment, and it's showing Belarus and Putin working together. But that's more a message for the domestic audience, both in Belarus and in Russia, and also the domestic audiences and the geopolitical audiences for those countries that are tacitly supporting Vladimir Putin, where he's trying to suggest that he's still on the world stage and can still do exercises. The Zapad 25 exercises are significantly smaller than any ones that have happened in the past.
It's quite interesting to study it from a military perspective. So why would Russia do it when it's still involved in a grueling war of attrition? But it did make quite a big thing out of the nuclear drills it was going to run, having deployed nuclear weapons into Belarus. It was only, I think, of December last year that Russia and Belarus signed a treaty. Alexander Lukashenko, the last European dictator, and part of that was putting Belarus under the nuclear umbrella of Russia. Now, so why would Russia do that? Probably just to make clear that NATO will look after Belarus if anything happens. Also, by formalising having more Russian troops within Belarus, eventually, probably we could agree that Belarus is almost partially fallen to Russia anyway, and therefore probably going to fall. I think the one thing that was interesting, though, was I think there were something like 3,000 or 4,000 Russian forces involved, about 10,000 Belarusian, which sounds like quite a lot if you were the British Army. But 4 years ago, it was 200,000 involved. So it was a microcosm of what it was before. And I think it was a two-phase operation. First phase was land and air incursion to Belarus. The second phase was kicking them out, sort of doing a counterattack. And as you and I know, that it's one thing having mass, but you need to operate together with each other because different nations have different ways of doing things, different frequencies, different standard operating procedures. So after 4 years, I can see militarily why it would be useful. I think the worry for me, though, was that it wasn't a coincidence. I've got a list of them here. Poland did Iron Defender at the same time, which was something like 30,000 troops, including from America and Canada. You work clockwise round. Lithuania, they had Thunder Strike, 17,000 troops. Go to Latvia, 12,000. Germany was doing a maritime exercise, and America was doing Iron Fist. All of that was at the same time. So you've now got a war-fighting country doing drills. You've got NATO doing defensive drills. What on earth would have happened then would another 19 drones going across the border, rather landing in an open field, landing in the middle of a brigade of NATO forces? All of a sudden now, the risk of these things getting horribly out of control would be very real. So I think whether it's actually a credible military exercise, I think it's far more for Russia demonstrating that to Ukraine, we attack through you. So you have to watch that northern border. That distracts ground forces on Ukraine. You can't all go to fight on the southeast of Ukraine. You have to keep some up there. And also it demonstrates that Russia eventually will take Belarus, and the more often its soldiers are in there, the more it just gets used to them being around.
And the final video I want to point you at this week is, again, an interview I did with Vlad Milyenko. Vlad is a professor at Oxford University and a Ukrainian. And what he doesn't know about the Ukrainian attitude and the Ukrainian approach to what's going on at the moment is not worth knowing. And in this clip, Vlad speaks about the Flamingo missiles, and he's got a wry smile on his face as he talks about them, as I think any Ukrainian has. And Putin been unable to cope with Ukraine striking Russian oil refineries. And we talked through the impact of, I think it's 17% of Russia's oil refining capability being impacted by Ukrainian long-range drone and missile strikes against the refineries, and the impact that that's having on Russia's ability to export oil and gas products, but also to support the domestic audience, and the impact that that's having on bringing the conflict to the attention of the Russian domestic audience and where that could go. And of course, Putin's biggest fear is a rising up of the Russian people. And this is where, as the Russian people find that their daily lives are being more and more impacted by the conflict, because Ukraine is having greater success against oil and gas refineries, restricting the amount of fuel that's available for people in their cars. And we're hearing that in some areas, people are queuing for hours and hours and hours. And if they get any fuel, it's only up to 10 litres. This is going to cause Putin real problems.
Although there are obviously no miracle weapons in this war, probably in any war, but having that strategic depth, having been able to cover maybe 3,000 kilometers distance with a massive missile carrying half a ton of explosives, that has been an incredible breakthrough.
A ton of explosives.
A ton of explosives.
The 1,150 kilograms is what the Flamingo, I think it's the Flamingo missile you're referring to.
Yeah, I'm referring to
3,000 kilometers. That is huge.
That is huge. And I don't think any country, actually, so the US has been able to cover a missile like that, because
the closest I think the we have in the West gets to about 900 kilograms in a missile, but yeah, and so we're not quite in the same league.
Not the same league, and also distance-wise. So this is probably one of the biggest current developments sort of within the military defense complex in Ukraine, because obviously this allows Ukraine not to ask for permission from Washington D.C. or Berlin or Paris or London, and strike the places that Ukraine wants to strike. And I think that is a significant change. And if I were Vladimir Putin, I would start thinking and scratching his head a little more vigorously now, because if the plans of production line is really, if the production plants are really going to hit those numbers of 100 missiles a month or even more, then that will really put a lot of pressure on the Russian air defenses, anti-missile defenses, because obviously they will not be able to cope with such especially such massive hits. And we might be thinking about Tatarstan and the Shahid production factories there, which are kind of within the range of Flamingo if it can reach that. So I think that is a big development, and the change of tone, or at least maybe I'm over-interpreting Vladimir Zelensky's kind of recent announcements, is looking quite optimistic. So it must be something is working well.
Well, I'll talk the optimistic in a minute. I want to put a military theory past you, but from an economic perspective, what are you seeing how the Russian markets are responding? How the other markets that are relying on Russian oil are responding to the potential reduction of 17% of capacity?
The Ukrainians are trying to hit both the oil refineries to deprive Russians of petrol and diesel, which is necessary, obviously, for the war effort. But also they're trying to hit the ports that are selling the crude oil. So trying to cut that oil machine from both sides. And it looks like, as you've alluded to, all those big shortage of fuel in various regions now popping up in southern Russia, in occupied territories, but also in Far East, right, as far as Primorsky Krai, Khabarovsky Krai, all the way in next to Vladivostok. Those changes are really hitting them hard. And obviously, Ukrainians presumably are not going to stop hitting the oil refineries. And there are still oil refineries which haven't been affected badly. So there is still room for improvement of accuracy of those strikes. And that will definitely affect ordinary lives of Russians.
So those are the clips that we have for this week. I strongly recommend that you go and watch all of the interviews that we've done because they are fantastic. But if you can't, have a quick look at these. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.